Everyone who ever lived in this house changed. It wasn't a slow drift. It wasn't a subtle shift in personality. It was the kind of transformation that terrified the people who knew them best. It was an erosion of the soul that happened in real time, behind closed doors, under the watchful gaze of those iconic, eye-like windows. If you ever find yourself driving down Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, and you stop in front of that impeccable Dutch colonial home, understand this. The most dangerous thing about this house isn't what you see on the facade. It's what it does to the human psyche once you step across the threshold. The Amityville house is often treated as a campfire story, a piece of Hollywood folklore recycled through dozens of sequels. But that's not what this is. Amityville is a case study in the breakdown of sanity. It is a place where normal people developed violent impulses out of thin air, where sleep became an impossibility, where fear wasn't a jump scare, but a corrosive obsession that ate away at the family unit until nothing was left but hollow shells of human beings. Tonight, we aren't just retelling a movie plot. We are dissecting the real history, the psychological timeline, and the sinister patterns that turned this address into the most disturbing location in American history. If you value your sleep, never, under any circumstances, book this place. Chapter 1. The Night of the Defios. To understand the shadow that hangs over this land, we have to go back to the early hours of the 13th of November, 1974. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was not a stable man, but no one could have predicted what would happen at 3:15 a.m. that morning. Armed with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle, Butch moved through the house like a specter, murdering 6 members of his own family as they lay in their beds: his parents, his 2 brothers, his 2 sisters. But here is where reality begins to warp. What disturbed the investigators wasn't just the carnage, it was the impossible silence of the crime. The 6 victims were found face down in their beds, in almost identical positions. There were no signs of a struggle. Toxicological reports showed no sedatives in their systems. A .35 caliber rifle is an incredibly loud weapon, a thunderous crack that should have alerted the entire neighborhood. Yet, not a single neighbor reported hearing a gunshot. The family dogs didn't bark. No one in the house even sat up in bed. Ronald later claimed that voices inside the house told him his family was conspiring against him, voices that commanded the execution. At the time, the court dismissed this as a desperate plea for an insanity defense. But the investigators who processed the scene documented something they couldn't explain. The house felt unnaturally calm, almost sterile, as if the walls had simply absorbed the violence, drinking in the blood and the desperation, and then resetting themselves for the next occupant. The house didn't react to the murders, it consumed them. Chapter 2. The Land Before the House. Many believe the curse of Amityville began with the DeFeo murders, but the soil beneath Ocean Avenue was contaminated long before the first foundation stone was laid. Historical records and oral traditions suggest that the area near the Amityville River was avoided by local Native American tribes, such as the Shinnecock. Legend says the land was used as a quarantine zone for the sick, the dying, and those whose minds had become unclean or unstable. These individuals were seen as spiritually dangerous, and the land where they were left was believed to retain that sickness of the soul. In the 17th century, a man named John Ketchum, who many believe was an occultist driven out of Salem, built a residence nearby. Reports from that era mention unexplained phenomena, mental collapses, and a heavy sense of oppression that hung over the property like a fog. Homes built in that specific vicinity over the decades share a macabre ledger: unexplained deaths, sudden domestic violence, and recurring family tragedies. The Amityville house was not the first structure on that troubled ground. It was simply the most efficient trap ever built upon it. Chapter 3. The Lutz Family and the Death Clock. In December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz thought they had found the deal of a lifetime: a magnificent colonial mansion, complete with a swimming pool and a boathouse, for an unbelievably low price due to the tragedy a year prior. They moved in with their 3 young children. In less than a week, the atmosphere of the home curdled. First, there was the cold. Ice spots would form instantly in heated rooms. Then, the odors, a sickly sweet smell of perfume, followed by the stench of sulfur and rotting organic matter that flooded hallways with no physical source. Solid steel doors were ripped off their hinges in the dead of night. But the most terrifying phenomenon was the clock. Every night, without fail, George Lutz would wake up at exactly 3:15 a.m. In the beginning, he didn't know that this was the exact moment Ronald DeFeo had pulled the trigger. George would spend the rest of the night pacing the house, obsessed with the fireplace, feeling an inexplicable urge to keep a fire roaring even on warm nights. Meanwhile, Kathy suffered from vivid nightmares of being dragged through the house. The children's personalities began to fracture. Their youngest daughter began talking constantly to Jody, an entity she described as a pig with glowing red eyes that floated outside her window. The house was fragmenting the family, isolating each member in their own private chamber of horror. Chapter 4: The Psychological Collapse. This is where Amityville differs from a standard haunting: the physical and behavioral decay of the inhabitants. George Lutz began to physically transform. He stopped bathing, he stopped shaving, he lost weight rapidly, and his eyes took on a look of constant, jagged paranoia. He would spend hours staring at nothing, his gaze fixed on the walls, ignoring his business and his responsibilities. Friends who visited said it felt like George was being replaced by something else. In psychology, there is a concept called environmental amplification. It's the idea that a space can intensify our emotional states. But in Amityville, it wasn't just amplification, it was induction. The house seemed to attack the weak points of each individual. If you had a tendency toward anger, it made you fly into a rage. If you were prone to sadness, it made you suicidal. Kathy Lutz later stated that it felt like the house was pushing her husband toward an abyss, testing his breaking point every hour of the day. The air inside the house was described as thick, as if you were walking through water. After just 28 days, the limit was reached. During a final night of terror, the full details of which the family never fully disclosed, they fled, leaving behind clothes, furniture, and every possession they owned. They never returned for so much as a fork. Chapter 5: The Thin Line Between Hoax and Pattern. Skeptics claim the Lutz story was a hoax designed for profit. They point to inconsistencies in their stories and legal battles over the rights to the Amityville brand. But if it was just a lie, how do we explain the subsequent reports? Independent investigators, including the famous Ed and Lorraine Warren, entered the house and reported identical sensations: an overwhelming physical oppression, time distortion, and a sense of directed hatred. Photographers captured images that still defy simple explanation, such as the infamous photo of the ghost boy peering out from a dark doorway. Subsequent owners have tried to downplay the house's fame, changing the address and the iconic windows. Some say nothing happened to them. Others, however, sold the house in record time, citing personal reasons they refuse to elaborate on. The Amityville pattern doesn't require your belief to function. It manifests in behavior. When different people, across different decades, enter a space and report the same alteration in their brain chemistry and temperament, we stop talking about ghosts and start talking about geopathology, the study of places that are fundamentally sick. Chapter 6: Why this house is different. Why did Amityville become the gold standard of American horror? Because it combines 5 factors of the perfect storm for human collapse: extreme violence, a mass trauma event in a confined space, confined architecture, the colonial design that isolates rooms and muffles sound, sleep deprivation, the 3:15 a.m. phenomenon that destroys the REM cycle and erodes logical judgment, emotional stress, financial and familial pressure being used as psychological fuel, historical trauma, the accumulated energy of land, used to isolate those with broken minds for centuries. The Amityville house doesn't just scare you with noises in the attic. It pressures your mind until you start to doubt your own identity. It doesn't want you to run away. It wants you to change. It wants you to become part of its history of violence. Pressure changes behavior, and the pressure in Amityville is constant, closing the final consequence. The Amityville house is more than just wood and brick in Long Island. It is a silent warning. It is a reminder that we are not just who we think we are, but also a product of the environments we inhabit. There are places in this world that act as catalysts for our inner darkness, places that whisper to our lowest instincts and wait for us to give in. If you ever find yourself in Amityville, New York, to enjoy the view of the canal, walk through the town center, but do not linger on Ocean Avenue. Do not try to peer through those windows to see what lies within. And above all, do not mistake the silence of that house for peace, because the silence of Amityville is merely the house waiting for the next person it can break. If you value your sleep and your mind, don't book this place.